Lisa Elvin-Staltari here with an edition of Genealogy Research for French Canadian genealogy. I wanted to throw this out to you because I've been getting a lot of questions lately about different mistakes and myths, and I actually put it out there in on Facebook to different groups, and I am so thankful to all of you. At the end I will acknowledge all of you, and I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. But thank you so much, all of you. You've been just marvelous to give me these suggestions, because a lot of it I had sort of forgotten about. And so I'm like, what other? I knew the main ones I wanted to talk about, but you really fleshed it out for me. So thank you. So let's get on with the show, and let's have a look at the top 15 myths and mistakes in French Quebec genealogy. So the first myth that I want to talk about is one that persists to this day, particularly in French Canada. Many of my French Canadian friends actually believe that the filles du roi, the marriageable girls, were both groups that were prostitutes. And one should never, I had one of my dear friends say to me, "Why are you studying the prostitutes?" And I said, "What?" And he said this is what he was told in society, and possibly, in school. This is what they grew up feeling or knowing. Many French Canadians do not actually know their history per se. They know their family name, they know things, but they don't really know the details. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that these women came so early and their names are forgotten to history. And the prostitution area of it comes from an account from Baron de La Hontan of his time in New France. And there's many other writers who kind of picked up on this. And one of the reasons why they talk about the filles du roi as potential women of loose morals is the fact that before they came, New France was often regarded, much like Australia, like a penal colony where undesirables were sent. So the fact that these women were going meant that, why were they going? And most of all, they were getting paid in the filles du roi case. So, I mean, you kind of put two and two together and get, 8. But in this case, we can clearly say that only one fille du roi was actually accused of being a prostitute or indicted. And her name was Catherine Guichelon. And other than that, I mean, there were no other real instances that we know of where it was a prostitute. Most of them were either, orphans or women of low economic means. Some of them actually, though, were women from the nobility. There was a handful, maybe 10% or so, I haven't done the numbers, who were actually from the upper class. And they elected that they wanted to go, and they were kind of paid, if you will, which could have further accelerated the myth, that they were getting money. And yes, they did get kind of a bonus, if you will. Most women got bonuses of 50, but to the higher you went I've seen bonuses of 1,000 being given, £1,000 being given to filles du roi. So that's part of that myth, but we can clearly state that they were not prostitutes. So I'm going to start by saying, what the heck is a D? Well, first of all, let me make sure that we know how to pronounce it. D and not dit. And I will be the first one to tell you, if you listen to my early videos on les filles du roi, you will note that I use the word dit. And the reason is that I'd always read it and I knew what it meant and all that because I am French Canadian, or half French Canadian. But the fact of the matter is, I'd never actually heard anyone say it until I heard it in English. And so I just thought that that's how they said it, even though I guess somewhere I knew it was wrong. Well, I got summarily corrected. And then I turned to all of my French Canadian, not only family, but friends, and said, "Hey, why didn't you correct me?" "Oh, it was cute." I was like, okay, no, it's not cute. So I want to make sure that we know that it is D and not dit. And what does it represent? It actually represents something that started in France, and it's actually seen a little bit. I've not seen it but they say it exists in Scotland as well. And basically what it started off with was military names so that they would know, there would be a Beaubien and he came from La Rochelle, or a Beaubien and he came from another place, La Montagne. And so that was so we could differentiate. Now, as they came to Canada, New France, there were a lot of Lefebvres and Rivals and all of that. So to differentiate themselves, they began adopting, we would call it nicknames, but in French it is a D name that means also known as. So, and there are so many variations. A lot of them have to do with geography, where you're from, but some have to do with physical, either big or little. Sometimes there's a joke in between where a man who's very small is called le grand, the big one, and vice versa. Sometimes it's about his profession, and sometimes it's about some trait of his. And let me talk to you about, in my family, we have Claude Lefebvre dit Boulanger. Now, I don't know if my great-grandfather was a baker, but that's what Boulanger means. Eventually, over time, my family took on the name Boulanger. It took many, many generations, but they were known as Lefebvre dit Boulanger. And so there'll be a Lefebvre section of my family and a Boulanger. Now, Bernard Lesnier dit La Liberté, that is a military honor nickname, if you will. This is the man who was free. La Liberté means freedom. So this man was obviously someone who cherished liberty and possibly was a free spirit, and there are many La Libertés, and they're not linked to Lesnier, and that is one of the things I've found. Now, Nicolas Rivard de la Vigne, who's also one of my great-grandfathers, his nickname comes from his mother's side of the family, who owned a piece of land called Clos de la Ligne, and he became known in New France as Nicolas Rivard de la Vigne, Sœur de la Vigne, the Lord of the vine. That's what la vigne means, it's the vine. But it comes from his maternal side of his family. So that's an interesting kind of, as you're doing French genealogy, to sort of see where it comes from. And we have all kinds of examples of that. For example, you could have Saint-Onge, du Saint-Onge, which is a place, or you could have Meunier, which is a woodmaker, or someone who is a carpenter, Carpentier. And so it becomes very, very important that you understand the origin of those names and what it means. And sometimes they were reversed, and sometimes they were using it, but the priest decided only to use Rivard or La Vigne. So it becomes this kind of hunt and peck search, because as many records as we have in French Canada, we often, because there's so many of them and there's so many of the same name, you really have to be careful that you are actually barking up the right tree. So that is the origin and the usage of D names. Now, D names fell out of favor, and eventually, even in my family, I think around in the late 1900s, in the late 18th century, that's when they decided, in 1891, they were still using it. By 1901, they were that's kind of the breaking point where I see it. Obviously, if you're moving to America or you go somewhere else, you're not going to have this big long name in French that no one can pronounce. So on some level, that's part of the change that you will see. So that is what D names represent. Now, I get a lot of feedback about the marriageable girls versus the king's daughter. Most people are familiar, a lot of people are familiar with the king's daughters. Not as many are familiar with Mes Filles Mariées. And they kind of confuse the two. So it's important to understand the difference. The King's Daughter was a program where groups of women, usually 90 to 100 on one ship, would come, and they were promised a dowry, and they were promised, a lot of different things. And they came as a group, and it was very structured. The marriageable girls, on the other hand, were completely on their own. Yes, they had a bit of sponsorship. They knew people. It was a group of women from 1634 to 1662 who came. There was about 262 of them. They did not have the same advantages as les filles du roi, and they were definitely seen as people who were not braver, but certainly were more pioneer stock, and they usually had a connection to the person that was there. But they are viewed as marriageable girls, les filles à marier. So they came across with the same intent. They didn't just come across for fun or to, do their own thing. It really was, the intent was the same, but how they got there was different. And that's kind of how you can view it. One of the biggest misconceptions is how to say names in French and how to pronounce them. One of the things that I would recommend is this 2-volume set. It is in French, Votre nom et son histoire. And these 2 volumes really tell the tale of what these names represent. But and so that gives you a bit of history. But once you understand what the name could mean, for example, Boisvert, which is the second one there, Boisver means green wood. So that it would be greenwood in English. So if you have a greenwood, you may have been a Boisvert at one time. And I'm going to give you the link, one of the best things to do is to actually Google how to pronounce Boisvert. And I'm going to give you the link to a fabulous website or YouTube video channel that I use all the time, because honestly, you don't always know how to say the name. And I want to know how a French person would say and a lot of the names I know because I've seen them. So starting from the top, we have La Sœur D, there's that D, Desaulniers, Boisvert, Joyal, Doutresac, La Verdure, and Desrousseaux. So these are for the English tongue, challenging to say. But if you actually listen to the YouTube channel or any Google, there's lots of them out there, it will really help you. But the most important thing to understand is to understand what the word could mean. And once you understand it, it may help kind of cement how to pronounce it. So that's one of the tips that I would give you. One of the best comments I got when I asked the question about, what do you see as myths and things like that? Well, we tend to read the priests as if they're, obviously holy and obviously, always right. Well, not so much. Sometimes, as in this viewer said, sometimes they got into the wine a little bit more. And so in this example, in my own family, we have Joseph Bruyette. So you can see on the side, it's Joseph Bruyette. He is actually indexed as Joseph Bruyette. And so you see it. But once you actually read it, you see that his name is Joseph, né ce jour de Narcisse Gingras, journalier. Et that's really hard to say, Eustache de Massicotte. I can read the last name, but I'm not sure of the first name. But so I know that it's Gingras and Massicotte, which is not anything to do with Bruyette. In fact, the Bruyette comes from the Godfather. So the priest got a little confused there. So you have to read the thing. And so as you're reading the baptismal certificate, you know that the first name comes, the name of the child comes first. And then we see, when he was born, whether he was born today or when he was born, yesterday or the day. Usually children are baptized within 24 hours. So and it will say né ce jour, which means born this day, or né hier, or né avant-hier, which means 2 days ago. And so it's important to know, because another viewer said, a lot of times, for example, they're not going to, people think the baptismal day is the same as the birth date, and it's not. Sometimes it is, but it's important to read it. And even if you don't speak French, part of this is understanding that it's always the same. Now, they may have mistakes, but it's always the same structure. And that's what's so beautiful about French Canadian records and how they actually figure it out. So you have Joseph, and then you have his father's name, you have his mother's name, and then you would have the godmother and godfather. So these are things that are important to kind of get your head around, to be able to understand how the marriage record is supposed to look. We're going to look at, not the marriage, baptismal. We're going to look at marriage record in a minute. But it's just important to read it. That's the most important. And that applies to every single person, like every single genealogy. It doesn't even matter about French Canadian. So really and truly read as much as you can. One of my favorite comments comes from Pamela, who says, if your second toe is longer than your big toe, then you have indigenous blood in you, and it is probably an Indian princess. So everybody, and not everybody, but a lot of people believe a lot of, old wives' tales, and obviously they think that they have Native ancestry, when in fact they don't. No, that's not to say that French Canadians don't have Native ancestry. Many of them do. But you have to prove it. You have to know it's not just because you have high cheekbones and your skin tone is a little bit. I have a little bit darker and that sort of thing. I have cousins of mine who absolutely, profess to have Native American or Native Canadian blood. And I, from a visual point of view, I could see it, but I haven't done the research. But that's how people are. They kind of say that. Then the other thing is the royal lines. Everybody wants to be related to someone famous or royal. Are we? More than likely, if you go back farther, far enough. But it's not enough to just click on, the next one, and you'll find any link. Remember that when you are looking at, certainly for royal lines, there's something called a gateway ancestor. And a gateway ancestor is usually one where people have done the research to the royal lines. And so the ancestor in North America will lead you to, a particular prince or a particular king or a particular person that you're looking. So that is one of the things you should turn to before you start doing your own research. People have been doing this for 100 years. So it's very, very important to assess and to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that so-and-so's son is so-and-so's mother and so-and-so, that sort of thing. You've got to do the work. You can't just rely on hearsay and, because someone else put it on their tree. One of the things we find in French genealogy is the plethora of names. And I wanted to give you an example in my mom and her siblings. So my mom, and you'll see that it's usually the third name that they use. Okay, usually. So we have Marie-Angèle Gisèle. We have Marie-Jeanne Denise, that's my godmother. Marie-Rose Monique, another sister, or my aunt. Then we have my uncle, Joseph Hubert Gaston. He was called that. And then we come to Joseph Marcel Henri. That's how it was written. He did not use the name Henri. He used the name Marcel. So it's important to see that. Now, the thing about, you'll see how many Maries and Joseph, obviously. Yes, it is true. Everybody usually started with Joseph or Marie, but we'll see that there are some changes. So we have my grandfather, who is Joseph Auguste Benoit Briette. He used the name Benoit. And then my great-grandfather was Joseph Briette. No other name. That was his name. My third times great-grandfather was just Hubert Briette. No Joseph. My grandma was Marie Blanche Boulanger. And my great-grandmother, this is a mouthful, Marie-Anna Hermeline Lefebvre de Boulanger. Can you imagine having a name like that? She obviously went by I never met her, but she went by the name Hermeline. Now, my third great-grandmother, Emily, did not have Marie in front of her name at baptismal. So she was just plain old Emily Guillemette. So you don't stick a Marie unless you have the baptismal. You can't assume, but it is, I would say probably 8 times out of 10, maybe 7 out of 10, they've got the Joseph and the Marie. I myself, I am Catholic by birth, but Marie is my first name. So Marie, Elisabeth, Anne, Marie, and so that is my name. And my brother was also Joseph Robert Scott, but he did not use. He uses the name Robert. My father's name is Robert Anderson, and he did not have Joseph because he was not Catholic. So it kind of, like you say, you just have to kind of piece it together. Where who were they married? Did they continue? Now on to the next generations and the next generation. You're not going to see any of this. This is when you're in the deep thicket of things in the 17th and 18th century, even into the 1930s, 40s, and then by the 50s and 60s, it gets a little more creative and not so pedantic. So you really have to understand how these names are. But these are their names, and they are on the baptismal. And sometimes people use their name just out of the blue. So you have to be alert to that, because they do have, and this is just a sprinkling. There are some in my family who have 4 or 5 names as first names. I just couldn't find them when I was looking for them, but I know I've seen them. So you've got to understand that the rule is, but there are exceptions to that rule. So the Joseph and the Marie, of course, and the third name is usually correct, but sometimes they don't have 3 names, and sometimes they don't have the Joseph, and sometimes they don't have the Marie. So you've got to just see that. So on an earlier slide, we talked about the D names. Well, we didn't talk about how they would evolve. So Nicolas Rivard de la Vigne becomes all of these names. Rivard becomes all, and how? Because, for example, his son Julien became Julien Rivard de la Glanderie. His other son François became La Corsière. His other son did take the name Lavigne. His 4th son Jean took the name Préville, which is actually from his wife's last name. So they did all kinds of stuff. So you just never know. One of the best resources to look at is our French-Canadian Ancestors series of books. At the end, they usually give you all of the variations, and I've included if you can get there's 28 volumes of this. If you can get your hands on it, great. If not, I've given you the link to the Facebook group that actually has all of these downloaded, and it's just amazing. So in these 3 that I've cut and pasted, we have the Genealogy Name, we have the Lavigne and Rivard, and we have, look at all the changes from Lefebvre de Boulanger. That's amazing. So it gives you some idea of how it can change over time, not only in Quebec, but elsewhere as well. One of the best comments I received was about not paying attention to the generations and getting tangled up in the weeds. 2 different couples I just did, and these got confused in the tree that I've worked on. Each generation is so important. Jean-Baptiste Gervais and Jean-Anne Leblanc, in an example, were married in 1687. And then I had another Jean-Baptiste Gervais and another Anne Leblanc who married in 1694. Do you know how easy that would be if you weren't looking at this most important document that we're going to talk about next? One of the ways of staying within the tree, the branch that you're working on, is the next mistake that a lot of people make. One of the most important records we have is the marriage record. And in that marriage record, is contained basically the whole genealogy of this couple. So in order to ascertain if we've got the right people, you've got to start with the marriage record. That's how I start. And that is my belief. And the reason why I believe that is because we have in this case, Hilaire Messicotte and Marie Veillet. So in Hilaire Messicotte de cette paroisse, fils major age, of Jacques and Angèle of this parish, and of Marie Veillet and of this parish, and she is a minor, but Joseph Veillet is her father, and Adelaide Gouin is her mother. Now, the reason why I say this is that the baptismal, for example, to find the baptismal of this person, you will need to coordinate. So Hilaire Massicotte, absolutely, when you see you go back to this marriage and you go, is Hilaire Massicotte, are the parents listed the same ones as in the marriage record? Yes. Otherwise, you're looking at a birth certificate and you don't know, just because it has that name. So you need to verify. So as you're going back, always go back to what does the marriage record say? It is those two. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always right. Remember, we talked about the priest, but usually they get it right with the marriage. I don't know why, but I haven't seen that many mistakes. So basically what you've got to do is take the marriage that you can find, list that, go back, find the baptismal, and then from there you can keep going backwards, always finding the next ring up, looking for the marriage certificate. So once you know, for example, that Jacques Massicotte and Marie Veillet, and remember, you're looking at the parish, you're looking at all kinds of things. You want to make sure, because there could be the same people. So you're going to look for their marriage record next. And then you're going to look for his parents, for example, and then you're going to look for Hilaire's birth certificate. So there's a sequence of events that I don't want to say perfected, but for me, it really, really makes a difference in making sure that I've got the right ones. So someone did submit this, and I absolutely love it. Ancestry has all the records, and the trees are all correct. Obviously not. All right. We love Ancestry, whether it's .com or .ca. We love Ancestry. I use it all the time. I'm a big user, power user. However, I use it for the records. I don't necessarily, and on the family trees are clues. And it's like throwing spaghetti on a wall. And so but when I first started out, I was clicking like crazy. It was great. I got all the way to Charlemagne before I realized, how do I know this is true? And so we've all been there. And so here are some sites that really specialize in French Canadian genealogy. I will list them in the notes. WikiTree obviously is really, it's free. Family Search is free. The others are not, and the Genealogie de Québec et d'Amérique française, those are all free, those three. And then you've got PRDH and Genealogie Québec. These are paid sites. I could not exist without Genealogie Québec, and I do pay for usage of the PRDH when I need to. When I'm doing usually when I'm doing really intricate tree work, I kind of rely on it a lot because they've got it really down to a science. But Genealogie Québec and PRDH are kind of linked as well. So it's important to know the people who know. Basically, that's what I'm saying. Now, in that Nos Origines, that's what the Genealogie du Québec is called. It is a fabulous site, and it's a free site, as I said, and people have submitted. And generally, I have found them to be quite remarkably good. So they don't often include, for example, families that move to the United States, or they don't include all the children, all that sort of thing. But by and large, it's an excellent resource. Family Search also has some really impressive looking things. I use it less. I honestly, WikiTree I probably use every single day on every single tree. I kind of it's my verification because they are so good at sourcing. And that's what you're going to discover. As you get deeper and deeper into genealogy, it really does get tougher and tougher because you're having to prove all these things. It's not enough to just say, okay, this person has that name and I'm going up and up and up. You got to find all of the information, all the census reports that they could potentially be on, all the marriage certificates that they could be on, kind of get a feel for where they're living, that sort of thing. And that is the key. So use Ancestry, but remember, the trees in particular are not all correct. And I also want to tell you that many people think all the records are online. They're not. There's only I've been told, and it could vary, but the last time I was told, I think it was something like 80% of information that we need is not online. So information we have, which is a tremendous amount, it only represents about 20% of all the, the actual records that we could find. So can you imagine the information that is out there for you to find if you're not just doing it online? So remember that, please. One of the most important things is knowing about history. You know that song, Don't Know Much About History, or what a slide rule is for. If you don't know Quebec history, you're going to be at a disadvantage. You need to know the key dates, the key people. You need to know Jacques Cartier. You need to know Samuel Champlain. You need to know Louis Hébert. You need to know when Quebec was founded. You need to know when Trois-Rivières was founded. You need to know when Montreal and Paul Chamédé de Maisonneuve and his things. Those are the early parts of history. But there's other things too. You need to know what the Plains of Abraham represent in 1759. So an understanding of history is critical because, for example, I will see people put in trees 1625 Trois-Rivières. Well, Trois-Rivières wasn't there in 1625. It actually existed in 1634. Or they'll put Montreal 1635. It wasn't there. So part of that is understanding, even so small as in 1628, the Kirk brothers took over Quebec, and it was actually captured by the British, and all of the people, except very few, the Héberts and the Couillards, I think, were the ones that stayed behind. So there was nobody living in Quebec between 1628 and about 1632 or 1634. So that's important to know, because imagine if you're telling me that someone's born in 1631 in Quebec. I don't really think that could have happened. So these are the kind of things you need to know in order to really, really have a depth and a knowledge and a fact base to your research. One of the things that's so critical, in addition to history, is location, geography. For many of you who have never been to Quebec, it will be challenging to understand where things are located. Once you have a basic understanding, it will be much easier. For example, many of my people come from a place called Trois-Rivières, and many of them are found in Shawinigan. If I were doing research, because I know where Trois-Rivières is, and all of a sudden an outlier comes out and they're found in Montreal, I would immediately question this and say, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense because, the one thing about early French Canadians, and to this day, to some extent, they don't move around a lot. And they kind of stick where they are, unless they're going for work. That's a whole different subsection that I probably will do a video on one day. So it's important to know where your people are, and if they stray, you have to have proof that it's really your guy. And maybe they decided they were going to do the railroad, and maybe they did. There usually is a reason. They're not just moving around willy-nilly. They are staying in a place, and sometimes what they'll do is they'll go, like for example, in my case, they had Trois-Rivières, and then as new developments came up, they would move to a smaller location, finding land, that sort of thing. Again, knowing what they did for a living, that's critical too. Most of them are farmers, but some of them were journaliers, as we call it, or factory workers. So all of that is very, very critical, so you don't, again, get lost in the weeds and start jumping around. And that's true, by the way, in all genealogy, but particularly in Quebec. I call this section, Where's That Girl? Because one of the things we're not familiar with if we do a lot of American or different genealogy, and we suddenly are in Quebec, we're looking, for example, I might have been looking for Marie Massicotte, but she's not there because she's still going under her maiden name, even though she's married. That's how important that maiden name, that maternal line is to Quebec, and how important. And it was only by 1891, 1881, in that ballpark, that you begin to see the women adapt their husband's name. And so that becomes part of trying to find where the girl is. So If you find Hilaire Mascot and you find a Marie Veillet and you don't know, now it could be a second wife, it could be, that's where you have to do the research and make sure it's your Marie Veillet. Now again, the censuses are very important. We had one in 1666, 1667, 1681. Those are the main colonial ones, if you will. By 1851, there were some that were taken in 1825 and 1842, I believe. But the main ones for Quebec were 1851 and on, and every 10 years they have a census. One of the most critical things I can tell you to do is to look at the top of the sheet, whatever sheet you're looking at, and make sure it's in the right place. I cannot tell you, it's happened more than once, where I've been looking at a sheet and it's the wrong sheet. It's the wrong place. And it's very, very important that you identify, is it the right county that you're thinking of? And this is, again, true in all genealogy, but particularly somehow on Ancestry, I have found many times, and I've reported it, because of the language, they will have an image that isn't the right image. And it is from some other parish. And so it's very, very important. This is from Saint-Geneviève de Betska. And so one of the things, the county is Champlain, but the parish is Saint-Geneviève de Betska, where most of my people came from. And so, which is very close to Trois-Rivières. So it's, but again, it's part of that overwhelming arc of understanding where, putting them in the right place. Not only the right years. We have a tendency in genealogy to go, they're born, they're married, they're died, and these are their kids, and we don't actually put them in the places where they were and why they were there and what they did there. So the censuses, although they can be wrong, and certainly in those early censuses of 1681, there are so many mistakes. I cannot even tell you, families that are mixed up and that sort of thing. So there's and people that are not accounted for. One of the things that people ask me all the time is, why are there two censuses, 1666 and 1667? Well, the fact of the matter is they did the one in 1666 and they missed a lot. Strange for a government to make mistakes, but they did even then. So they redid it to make sure that they had included everyone. So you may have a family that is noted twice in the census. You may have one that is only noted in the 1667, one that is only noted in the 1666, because they actually missed people in the second one as well. So it's like, as I say, these are all clues in addition to everything else that you're gathering about trying to really, really make certain you've got the right, people in the right places and in the right years. And this completes our myths and mistakes in French Canadian genealogy. Now I want to make sure to do a shout out to all the wonderful people who responded to my post and gave me lots and lots of things to think about and suggestions, many of which I have utilized in this episode. So I really appreciate your help. It really means the world to me to have input from you, from the community. It really is. It helps me be a better genealogist. So thank you so very, very much. And with that, I will let you go and we'll see you on the next episode. Until then, au revoir.